Homeless woman feeds disabled child without imagining he is the son of a millionaire. The bitter December wind whipped through the streets of downtown Boston, carrying with it the last remains of autumn leaves and the whispers of forgotten stories. Among the hurried footsteps and impatient horns of rush-hour traffic, Grace Matthews stood motionless, her weathered hands clutching a frayed scarf that had once been the color of summer roses. Now, like everything else in her life, it had faded to a muted shade of what it once was. The locals knew her as the Scarf Lady, a fixture outside Mario's family restaurant, where the smell of garlic bread and marinara sauce mingled with the exhaust fumes of passing buses. Some days, she'd catch fragments of conversations about herself, whispered theories about who she was, what she'd been. A former professor, they'd say, a musician, a writer. The truth, like her collection of worn scarves, was woven with threads of a past she chose to keep wrapped tightly around herself. Today was different. The usual rhythm of the street had shifted, like a record playing slightly offbeat. Grace noticed it first in the way the morning light caught the frost on the pharmacy windows, the abandoned one at the corner of Cedar and Fifth. Then came the sound, barely audible above the city's constant hum. A whimper, soft but distinct, carrying through the alley beside the shuttered building. She found him huddled behind a stack of empty produce crates, a small figure in a thin grey hoodie and wet flip-flops, entirely unsuitable for the weather. His eyes, wide and dark against his pale face held a universe of unspoken words. Grace had seen that look before, in another life, in another pair of eyes that had haunted her dreams for years. Without hesitation, she reached into her bag, past the carefully folded newspaper clippings and the notebook she'd filled with observations of passers-by, until her fingers found what she was looking for. A small container of yogurt, her only food for the morning. The boy watched her every movement with a mixture of wariness and desperate hope. "Here," she said, her voice rough from disuse. "Strawberry. It's not much, but it's something." She held out the yogurt and a plastic spoon she'd saved from her last visit to the soup kitchen. The boy didn't move at first, reminding Grace of the stray cats she sometimes fed, calculating risk versus reward. Then, slowly, he reached out and took the offering. His fingers were red with cold, and Grace felt something inside her chest crack open, like ice breaking on a spring river. As he ate, she noticed details that spoke volumes. The quality of his hoodie, despite its current state, not something from a discount store. The way he held the spoon, with the practiced grace of someone taught proper table manners. A small silver chain around his neck, partially hidden by his collar, bearing what looked like a medical alert tag. Grace settled herself on an overturned milk crate, careful to maintain enough distance not to frighten him. She began humming softly, an old lullaby her mother used to sing, about stars and dreams and safe harbors. The boy's shoulders gradually relaxed, and he finished every last bit of the yogurt. "Would you like to tell me your name?" she asked gently, though she already knew he wouldn't. Some questions weren't meant to be answered right away. Some stories needed time to unfold. He shook his head, as expected, but didn't retreat further into the alley. Instead, he wrapped his arms around his knees and watched her with those telling eyes. Grace recognized the look of someone who had run away from something, not towards something. She'd worn that same expression herself once upon a time. The rest of that first morning passed in comfortable silence. Grace shared the apple she'd been saving for later, cutting it carefully with a plastic knife into small, manageable pieces. She told him stories about the pigeons that gathered in the square, especially about old Pete, the one-footed bird who always got the best crumbs because he'd learned to hop right up to people's feet and look pathetic. When the sun began to sink and the shadows lengthened, Grace knew she had to make a decision. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the boy's thin clothing wouldn't provide nearly enough warmth for the night ahead. She had connections, people who could help, organizations that dealt with situations like this. But something in her gut told her to wait, to observe, to understand more before involving others. "I'll be back tomorrow," she promised, standing slowly, her joints protesting the movement. "Same time, I'll bring more food." She untied one of her scarves, a soft wool one in shades of blue and grey, and held it out to him. Until then, this might help a little. The boy took the scarf with trembling fingers, and for a moment, Grace saw a flash of something in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, but it was gone before she could be sure, replaced by the careful blank mask he'd worn most of the morning. As she walked away, Grace felt eyes on her back. Not just the boys, but others. In the reflection of a store window, she caught a glimpse of a black sedan parked across the street, its tinted windows concealing its occupants. She'd been on the streets long enough to know when she was being watched. That night, as she settled into her usual spot in the church doorway, 2 blocks over, Grace pulled out her notebook and began to write. She documented everything about the boy: his estimated age, his clothing, the way he moved, the silent language of his expressions. Years of teaching had taught her the value of careful observation, and years on the street had honed that skill into something approaching art. Tomorrow, she decided, she would bring not just food, but also a blanket she'd been keeping clean and dry for emergencies, and she would watch more carefully for that black sedan. In her experience, expensive cars with tinted windows rarely brought good news to people like her, people who lived in society's shadows, seeing everything but remaining unseen. As she drifted off to sleep, Grace found herself humming that same lullaby again, its melody carrying her back to another time, another place where she'd been someone else entirely. Professor Grace Matthews, PhD in child psychology, respected researcher, published author. Before everything changed, before she learned that sometimes the most dangerous truths wear suits and carry briefcases, and that sometimes the only way to fight back is to disappear completely. But now, for the first time in years, she felt something stirring in her chest, a familiar mix of protective instinct and professional curiosity. That boy's eyes held secrets, and Grace had always been good at unraveling mysteries, especially when they involved children in need. She just hoped she could help him before whoever was watching from that black sedan made their move. The next. Morning arrived with a crystalline clarity that only New England winters can bring. Grace had already been to St. Mary's soup kitchen, where Sister Margaret slipped her an extra yogurt and a few pieces of fruit after hearing about the boy. The nun asked no questions. She'd known Grace long enough to trust her judgment, and she'd seen enough of life's complications to know that sometimes silence was the greatest kindness. Grace approached the alley cautiously, scanning the street for the black sedan. It wasn't there, but she noticed something else. A man in an expensive overcoat standing at the corner, pretending to read the morning paper while his eyes darted frequently toward the alley. Her instincts, honed by years of both academic research and street survival, told her something larger was at play. The boy was exactly where she'd left him, huddled in the same spot, her scarf wrapped around his shoulders like a shield. His eyes lit up when he saw her. A tiny change, but to Grace, who'd spent years studying child behavior, it spoke volumes about trust beginning to form. "Good morning," she said softly, settling onto her milk crate. "I brought breakfast." She laid out her offerings: yogurt, a banana, an apple, and 2 slightly squashed but still edible muffins. The boy's gaze fixed on the food, but he waited for her nod before reaching for anything. As he ate, Grace noticed new details. There was a small tear in his hoodie that hadn't been there yesterday, and a scratch on his hand that looked fresh. He'd tried to clean himself up. His face was somewhat cleaner, suggesting he'd found water somewhere. The medical alert tag she'd glimpsed yesterday was now fully visible. It bore an engraving, but she was too far away to read it. "The pigeons are late today," she commented, maintaining their comfortable pattern of one-sided conversation. "Even old Pete hasn't shown up yet. Must be too cold for them." She pulled out the blanket she'd brought, worn but clean, wool enough to provide real warmth. Speaking of cold, the boy accepted the blanket with the same careful movements he'd shown yesterday, but this time he did something unexpected. He scooted slightly closer to her, just a few inches, but in the language of traumatized children, it was equivalent to a bear hug. Grace continued talking, keeping her voice low and steady. She told him about the morning at St. Mary's, about Sister Margaret's famous hot chocolate, about the way the sunrise had painted the church windows in shades of gold and rose. As she spoke, She was acutely aware of movement at the corner of her vision. The man in the overcoat had been joined by another, this one carrying a camera with a long lens partially concealed in a newspaper. The boy must have noticed too, because he tensed, his hands clutching the blanket tighter. Grace shifted slightly, positioning herself between him and the street without making it obvious she was doing so. "You know," she said as if nothing was wrong, "I used to teach children about the stars. Would you like to hear about the constellations?" He nodded, and she launched into an explanation of Orion, the hunter who walked the winter sky. As she spoke, she watched his body language carefully. He relaxed when she mentioned certain constellations but tensed at others. When she mentioned Ursa Major, the Great Bear, he actually flinched. A pattern was emerging, but Grace needed more data to understand it. Years of academic research had taught her to look for connections, to find the threads that tied seemingly random reactions together. She switched to telling him about the library where she spent many of her afternoons, describing the children's section with its comfortable beanbags and well-worn copies of favorite books. The mention of the library produced another interesting reaction. He looked up sharply, as if remembering something. Grace filed this away with her other observations. The library had been her sanctuary when she first found herself on the streets, a place where she could stay warm and maintain her connection to the world of knowledge she'd left behind. Perhaps it held similar significance for him. As the morning wore on, more people appeared on the street. A woman in a business suit walked past the alley 3 times, each time pausing to check her phone in a way that seemed too deliberate to be coincidence. A utility van parked across the street, but no workers emerged to actually perform any utility work. Grace recognized the signs of surveillance from her past life, the life she'd fled when her research had uncovered things certain powerful people wanted to keep hidden. But this wasn't about her, she was sure of that. This was about the boy, and whoever was looking for him had resources far beyond what would be deployed for a typical missing child. Around noon, she heard sirens in the distance. The boy's reaction was immediate and severe. He pressed himself against the wall, making himself as small as possible. Grace began humming the lullaby again, watching as the sound helped him regulate his breathing. Another piece of the puzzle. He associated police sirens with danger, yet showed no fear of her despite her appearance marking her as homeless and potentially dangerous in many people's eyes. "It's okay," she murmured. "They're going the other way." She pulled out her notebook, pretending to write while actually sketching a quick map of all the observers she'd noticed throughout the morning. The pattern suggested professional surveillance, not just concerned family members searching for a runaway. The boy watched her write with obvious interest. Grace carefully tore out a blank page and offered it to him, along with a pencil. He took them hesitantly, and for the first time, she saw a spark of something beyond fear in his eyes. Creativity. Perhaps or the simple joy of having a means of expression. He began to draw, his strokes uncertain at first, but growing more confident. Grace continued talking, telling him about the time she'd taught her students about the water cycle by having them create a terrarium in an old fish tank. As she spoke, she watched his drawing take shape. A staircase leading up to what looked like a room filled with blue. The image sparked something in her memory, a case study she'd read years ago about children's drawings and trauma. Before she could follow that thought to its conclusion, a commotion erupted on the street. The man with the camera had gotten into an argument with a hot dog vendor, creating a scene that drew everyone's attention. Grace knew a diversion when she saw one. She quickly gathered their things, keeping her movements calm and deliberate despite her racing heart. "I think," she said quietly, "we might want to visit that library I told you about. Would you like that?" The boy looked at his drawing, then at the street where the argument was getting louder, then back at Grace. He nodded once decisively and stood up, keeping the blanket wrapped around his shoulders like armor. As they prepared to leave the alley, Grace caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold, a familiar face in the crowd, someone she'd known in her previous life. Someone who had been present the day everything fell apart. But before she could process this revelation, the boy tugged at her sleeve, his eyes pleading for movement, for escape. The Boston Public Library stood like a fortress of knowledge against the winter sky. its marble facade a stark contrast to the modern glass buildings surrounding it. Grace guided the boy through the less-used side entrance, one she'd discovered during her own first days of seeking refuge within these walls. The familiar smell of books and warm air enveloped them as they stepped inside, and Grace felt the boy's shoulders relax slightly under the blanket. The children's section was quiet at this hour, most kids still in school. Miss Chen, the librarian who'd shown Grace kindness over the years, looked up from her desk and raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She'd learned not to ask too many questions about the various lost souls who found their way to her domain. Grace led the boy to a secluded corner where plush beanbags formed a cozy nook beside the tall windows. "This is my favorite spot," she whispered, settling down and patting the beanbag beside her. "You can see the whole square from here, but nobody can see you." The boy sat down carefully, his eyes scanning the shelves of colorful books with what looked like recognition. Grace watched as his gaze lingered on a particular section, books about art and drawing. She filed this information away with her other observations. "Would you like to continue your drawing?" she asked, offering him the pencil and paper he'd been using earlier. He nodded, immediately returning to his work on the mysterious blue room. As he drew, Grace noticed that his technique was surprisingly sophisticated for his age, suggesting art lessons, another piece of the puzzle about his background. While he was absorbed in his drawing, Grace pulled out her notebook and began documenting the morning's events. The face she'd seen in the crowd troubled her deeply. Daniel Whitman had been a colleague at the university, part of the board that had dismissed her concerns about certain research findings. Seeing him here now couldn't be coincidence. A soft tap on her shoulder startled her. Miss Chen stood there holding 2 hot chocolates from the library's cafe. "Thought you might need these," she whispered, setting them down. Her eyes flickered to the boy, then back to Grace. "The usual crowd is here today, suits asking questions." Grace nodded her thanks, both for the hot chocolate and the warning. The usual crowd was their code for authority figures searching the library, something that happened frequently, enough in this part of Boston to warrant its own terminology. The boy had paused his drawing, his attention caught by the hot chocolate. Grace pushed 1 cup toward him, noting how he waited for her to take a sip first before trying his own. Another learned behavior that spoke of caution and past experiences. His drawing was taking more shape now. The blue room had details she hadn't noticed before. A window with bars, a desk with what looked like medical equipment, and most tellingly, a figure in the corner that appeared to be crying. The staircase leading to this room was elaborate, almost Victorian in style. Grace felt her professional training kick in. Children's drawings often revealed what they couldn't or wouldn't say in words. The level of detail, the repetitive elements, the choice of subjects, all of these could provide insights into their experiences and emotional state. A commotion near the front desk drew her attention. 2 men in expensive suits were showing something to the security guard, probably badges or identification. Miss Chen was already moving, ostensibly to reshelve books, but actually creating a barrier between the men's line of sight and their corner. The boy had noticed too. His hand trembled slightly, causing the pencil to create a jagged line across his drawing. Grace began humming their lullaby softly, watching as the familiar melody helped calm his breathing. "There's another way out," she whispered, gathering their things slowly to avoid drawing attention. "Through the rare book section. Would you like to see some very special books?" He nodded, clutching his drawing to his chest. Grace led him through the maze of shelves, taking a route she'd mapped out long ago during her first months of homelessness. They passed through the reference section, where students sat absorbed in their studies, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. As they walked, Grace noticed something that made her pause. A newspaper left open on one of the tables. The headline caught her eye, "Preston Pharmaceutical Heir Still Missing." Below was a photo that made her heart skip a beat, a younger, cleaner version of the boy walking beside her. She guided him past quickly, but her mind was racing. Preston Pharmaceuticals was one of the largest medical research companies in the country. More importantly, it had been involved in the research program that had led to her own fall from grace 5 years ago. The rare book section was locked, but Grace knew that the service door beside it was usually open for staff. As they approached, however, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Daniel Whitman was standing there talking to another man she recognized from her past, Senator Harrison Wells, whose campaign had been heavily funded by Preston Pharmaceuticals. Grace pulled the boy into the shadow of a tall bookshelf, her mind working rapidly. The main exit was blocked by the men in suits. The service door was guarded by Whitman and Wells. They were effectively trapped in the library. But Grace hadn't survived on the streets this long without learning a few tricks. She led the boy to a specific shelf, Renaissance art, a section she knew well. Pulling out a large volume of Botticelli prints, she revealed what lay behind it. A small maintenance door, forgotten by most but known to the library's unofficial residents. The boy's eyes widened in understanding. Grace opened the door as quietly as possible, revealing a narrow passage that led to the building's old service elevator shaft. She'd never had to use this escape route before, but she'd always known it might be necessary someday. As they slipped through the door, Grace heard voices approaching their section. She carefully replaced the book and closed the door behind them, plunging them into near darkness. The only light came from ancient emergency bulbs that cast a faint greenish glow. The passage smelled of dust and old paper, but the boy showed no fear. If anything, he seemed more relaxed in this hidden space than he had been in the library proper. Grace made another mental note. He was comfortable in enclosed secret spaces, suggesting he'd spent time hiding before. They moved carefully through the passage, Grace leading the way with one hand on the wall. She could hear muffled voices through the walls. The search was spreading through the library, but she knew they had time. In her experience, people with power and authority rarely thought to look in the forgotten spaces, the margins where society's overlooked members made their homes. The boy tugged at her sleeve and pointed to his drawing. In the dim light, Grace could see he'd added something new, a hidden door, very much like the one they'd just used. The parallel wasn't lost on her. Whatever this child had been through, it involved secrets within secrets, hidden spaces within public facades. As they reached the end of the passage, Grace heard a sound that gave her hope, the distant rumble of the subway. The maintenance tunnel they were in connected to the old subway maintenance system, a fact she'd learned from other homeless people who used these underground spaces as shelter during the worst winter nights. But before they could proceed, voices echoed from a connecting tunnel. Maintenance workers, their flashlight beams visible around the corner. Grace and the boy pressed themselves against the wall, holding their breath. The voices grew closer, and in the stark beam of the flashlights, Grace caught a glimpse of something metallic glinting on the boy's medical alert bracelet, a symbol she recognized from her research days, the Preston Pharmaceuticals logo. The Phi. Maintenance workers passed without noticing them, their conversation about a broken heating duct fading into the distance. Grace waited until she was sure they were gone, before guiding the boy forward again. The subway rumble grew louder as they approached a metal door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Grace knew the door would be locked, but she also knew its weakness. Years of humidity had warped the frame slightly, making it possible to slip through if you knew exactly how to angle your body. She demonstrated the technique to the boy, who copied it with surprising agility, as if he were used to finding his way through tight spaces. They emerged onto a maintenance platform that ran parallel to the subway tracks. The boy stayed close. To Grace, his drawing clutched tightly against his chest as they made their way along the narrow walkway. The next maintenance door would lead them to a service stairwell that connected to the street level near the harbor, far from the library and anyone searching for them there. As they walked, Grace's mind raced through the implications of what she'd learned. The Preston Pharmaceuticals logo on the boy's medical alert bracelet, Daniel Whitman's presence, Senator Wells's involvement, it all connected to her past research that had cost her everything when she'd tried to expose the truth. The boy tugged at her sleeve again, pointing at something ahead. Through the dim tunnel lighting, Grace could see a figure standing near their exit door, someone in a maintenance uniform, but their stance was all wrong. The way they held themselves spoke of military or security training, not the casual posture of a subway worker. Grace pulled the boy back into the shadows, her mind working rapidly. There was another way out, but it would require perfect timing. She could hear a train approaching in the distance, its rumble growing louder by the second. She knelt down to the boy's eye level. "Do you trust me?" she whispered. He studied her, face for a long moment, then nodded solemnly. Grace squeezed his hand. "When I say run, we run, not before, okay?" The train's headlight began to illuminate the tunnel, casting long shadows. The false maintenance worker turned toward the light, momentarily distracted. Grace waited, counting the seconds, feeling the vibrations through the platform grow stronger. "Run!" They sprinted past the guard, just as the train thundered by, its noise covering their footsteps, its bulk hiding them from view. Grace guided the Saisi boy through a different maintenance door, this one leading to a ventilation shaft that would take them to street level through a more circuitous route. As they climbed the service ladder inside the shaft, Grace heard shouting below. Their escape had been noticed, but she knew they had time. These tunnels were a maze unless you knew them well, and she'd spent years mapping every possible route during her lowest times, when the streets above had become too dangerous. They emerged through a ventilation grate into an alley behind a fish market. The smell of the sea mixed with the day's catch, and seagulls wheeled overhead. The boy was breathing hard, but showed no signs of panic. If anything, he seemed more alert and focused than he had been in the library. Grace led him through a series of back alleys she knew well, places where surveillance cameras were scarce, and shadows provided cover. They needed a safe place to rest and think, somewhere none of their pursuers would think to look. The boy touched her arm and held up his drawing. He'd added more details during their quiet moments in the tunnel. The blue room now had a window view of the ocean, and there was a distinctive lighthouse in the background. Grace studied it carefully, her academic training clicking into place. The lighthouse was specific enough to be real, and there was something familiar about its shape. A memory surfaced, a newspaper article from years ago about Preston Pharmaceuticals converting an old lighthouse keeper's house into a private research facility. The article had mentioned something about innovative pediatric treatments, but Grace's attempts to investigate further had been blocked at every turn. The boy was watching her face intently, and she realized he was waiting to see if she understood. She nodded slowly, and relief flooded his features. He trusted her not just to protect him, but to understand, to help him reveal whatever truth had driven him to hide in that alley days ago. They needed somewhere safe to rest and plan their next move. Grace thought of Sister Margaret at St. Mary's, but the soup kitchen would be too obvious a destination. Then she remembered someone else from her past life, Dr. Sarah Chen, Miss Chen's sister, and a former colleague who had supported Grace's research before everything fell apart. Sarah had left academia to open a small clinic in the North End, serving the community regardless of their ability to pay. She'd helped Grace occasionally over the years, providing medical care without asking questions. More importantly, she had a basement office with a separate entrance, one that didn't appear in the clinic's official layout. Grace checked her watch. It was almost 3 o'clock. Sarah would be finishing her afternoon appointment soon. If they could reach the clinic by 4, they might have a chance to rest, to think, to plan their next move. The boy was looking tired, the adrenaline of their escape wearing off. Grace removed one of her scarves, a thick woolen one in shades of green, and wrapped it around his shoulders over the first one. As she did so, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a small scar behind his ear, surgical in nature, with a precision that spoke of professional medical work. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Her original research, the work that had led to her downfall, had been about experimental treatments involving neural implants in children. Preston Pharmaceuticals had claimed they were developing treatments for severe neurological conditions, but Grace had found evidence suggesting something far more concerning. The boy touched the scar absently, then reached for his pencil and paper again. He added another detail to his drawing, a small machine next to the medical equipment in the blue room, one with wires leading to a chair. The image sent a chill down Grace's spine, confirming her worst suspicions about what might have happened in that lighthouse facility. A siren wailed in the distance and the boy tensed. Grace began humming their lullaby again, watching as the familiar melody helped him relax. She knew they needed to move, to reach Sarah's clinic before anyone thought to look for them there. But first she had to make sure the boy understood what might be coming. She pointed to his drawing, then to the scar behind his ear, raising her eyebrow in question. He nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. Then he did something unexpected. He spoke, his voice rough from disuse but clear. "Help others." Those two words, "help others," echoed in Grace's mind as they made their way through the narrow streets of Boston's North End. The boy's voice had carried a weight beyond his. Years, a purpose that transformed him from a victim into something else entirely, a witness perhaps, or a messenger. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the old brick buildings, and the smell of fresh-baked bread wafted from the Italian bakeries that dotted the neighborhood. Under different circumstances, Grace might have stopped at Lucia's for day-old rolls. Maria, the owner, often saved some for her. But today, they couldn't risk being seen. Dr. Sarah Chen's clinic occupied the ground floor of a converted brownstone, its basement extending under the adjacent building. Grace led the boy down the narrow alley beside it, counting doorways until she reached the one she needed. Unmarked, unremarkable, but crucial to their safety. She knocked in a pattern she and Sarah had established years ago. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow. Moments later, the door opened to reveal Sarah herself, her white coat exchanged for a comfortable sweater, her sharp eyes taking in the situation immediately. "Inside," she said simply, stepping aside. "Quickly." The basement office was warm and dimly lit, with comfortable chairs and shelves lined with medical texts. Sarah locked the door behind them and turned to study her visitors. Her gaze lingered on the boy's medical alert bracelet, then moved to Grace's face with questions in her eyes. "Preston Pharmaceuticals," Grace said quietly. "The Lighthouse facility." Sarah's expression shifted from concern to understanding. "The experimental program." She moved to a filing cabinet, unlocking it with a key she wore around her neck. "I kept everything, Grace. After what happened to you, I knew someday someone would need the evidence." The boy had settled into one of the chairs, still clutching his drawing. His eyes moved between the two women with keen interest, following their conversation despite his silence. Sarah noticed his focused attention and smiled gently. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" she asked him. "Real chocolate, not the instant kind. And I have cookies, the good Italian ones from Lucia's." He looked to Grace for permission, and at her nod gave Sarah a small smile. As Sarah moved to the small kitchenette in the corner, Grace sat beside the boy and studied his drawing again. The lighthouse, the blue room, the medical equipment, it all aligned with the fragments of research she'd uncovered before being forced out of academia. Sarah returned with hot chocolate and cookies, then pulled out a thick file from the cabinet. "I've been collecting information," she said, spreading papers across her desk. "News reports, medical records, testimonies from former employees. After you disappeared, I couldn't let it go. Something wasn't right about that research program." Grace moved to the desk, her academic training kicking in as she scanned the documents. Charts, graphs, medical terminology that brought her back to her days as a researcher. But something caught her eye, a pattern she hadn't seen before. "The children," she murmured. "They all had exceptional artistic abilities." Sarah nodded. "That's what I found too. Every child in the program showed unusual creative talent, music, art, mathematics. The official story was that they were developing treatments for neurological conditions that affected gifted children. But the actual research," she trailed off, glancing at the boy. He had set aside his original drawing and was working on a new one. His hands moved with precise, practiced strokes, creating an image that made both women catch their breath. A detailed diagram of what appeared to be a neural implant, the same type of device Grace had glimpsed behind his ear. "He understands," Grace said softly. "More than they knew, I think. That's why he ran." Sarah studied the diagram with professional interest. "This is incredibly sophisticated work. The detail, the scale. He must have seen the actual research documents." The boy nodded, adding annotations to his drawing, not in words but in symbols that Grace recognized from her own research. Mathematical equations, chemical formulas, biological markers. He wasn't just reproducing what he'd seen, he understood it. They weren't treating these children, Grace realized, the pieces finally clicking into place. They were studying them, trying to understand how their brains worked, how they processed information. The implants weren't therapeutic, they were monitoring devices. Sarah pulled out another document, a research proposal she'd obtained through her medical contacts. Look at the funding sources. It's not just Preston Pharmaceuticals. There are government grants, military contracts, private investors. They're trying to understand exceptional cognitive abilities, maybe even find ways to enhance them. The boy had started another drawing, this one showing multiple children in different rooms, each with the same type of implant. Below each figure, he drew different symbols, musical notes, mathematical equations, artistic designs, a community of gifted children all under observation. Help others, Grace repeated his words. You weren't just trying to escape, were you? You want to expose what's happening there, to help the other children. He nodded solemnly, then pointed to Sarah's files and made a writing motion. Sarah understood immediately and provided him with a pen and paper. For the first time, he began to write actual words, his handwriting neat and precise despite his young age. They promised to help us learn, to make us better, but they just wanted to take what made us special, to copy it. Some kids started to change, forget things, lose their gifts. Grace felt a chill run down her spine. Her original research had hinted at ethical violations, but this was far worse than she'd imagined. She looked at Sarah, who was already moving to a locked drawer. In her desk, I have contacts, Sarah said, pulling out a small encrypted phone. Journalists, lawyers, ethical oversight committees, people who can help expose this without putting you or the children at risk. But before she could say more, they heard footsteps above, heavy, purposeful steps that didn't match the usual patterns of clinic staff. The boy tensed, his hand tightening around his pencil. Grace and Sarah exchanged glances, years of friendship and shared purpose conveying volumes in a single look. Sarah quickly gathered her files, sliding them into a waterproof document case. There's another way out, she whispered, moving to a bookshelf that looked perfectly ordinary but wasn't. Through the old prohibition tunnels, they connect to the harbor. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by voices asking questions about Dr. Chen's whereabouts. Grace helped the boy gather his drawings while Sarah activated some mechanism behind the bookshelf, revealing a narrow passage beyond. As they prepared to enter the tunnel, the boy tugged at Grace's sleeve. He pointed to his latest drawing, then to his head, then made a motion like a key turning. His meaning was clear. He didn't just have evidence of what was happening at the lighthouse facility. He had the key to understanding how it all worked, locked away in his exceptional mind. The voices above grew louder, and Sarah quickly ushered them into the passage. But before she closed the entrance, she pressed something into Grace's hand, a small USB drive. Everything I've collected, she whispered, plus access codes to secure servers where I've backed up the data. Be careful, old friend. The bookshelf slid back into place just as footsteps reached the basement door. Grace and the boy stood in darkness for a moment, listening as Sarah's voice, calm and professional, greeted whoever had come looking for them. Then Grace took the boy's hand, and together they began their journey through another set of hidden passages, carrying with them the evidence that could change everything. The Prohibition-era tunnel was narrow but well-maintained, its brick walls still solid after nearly a century. Grace's years on the streets had taught her about Boston's underground network of passages, but this one was new to her. The boy moved confidently beside her, as if dark tunnels held no fear for him. Their footsteps echoed softly as they made their way toward the harbor, guided by the beam of a small flashlight Sarah had pressed into Grace's hand, along with the USB drive. The air grew increasingly damp, carrying the faint scent of salt water. The boy tugged at Grace's sleeve and pointed to his newest drawing, the one showing multiple children with implants. Then he touched his own implant and made a gesture. That suggested communication or connection. Grace understood. The implants weren't just monitoring devices, they somehow linked the children together. That's how you know about the others, she whispered. You can sense them through the implants? He nodded, then held up his medical alert bracelet. Grace examined it more closely in the flashlight's beam and noticed something she'd missed before: tiny circuits embedded in the metal band. Not just an identification tag, but a sophisticated piece of technology. A distant rumble made them both pause. Not subway trains this time, boats, their engines reverberating through the tunnel walls. They must be nearing the harbor. Grace checked her watch. Almost 6 o'clock. The winter sun would be setting, providing extra cover for whatever came next. The boy suddenly stopped, his expression alert. He pointed to his implant, then down a side tunnel they'd nearly missed. His meaning was clear. He could sense something, or someone, in that direction. Grace hesitated only a moment before following his lead. The side tunnel was older, its bricks worn and glistening with moisture. It led them to what appeared to be a dead end, but the boy pressed his hand against the wall with purpose. After a moment, a section of brick swung inward, revealing a small room that might once have been used to store contraband liquor. Inside, huddled on a makeshift bed of old blankets, was a girl about the boy's age. She looked up as they entered, unsurprised by their arrival. Behind, her ear was an implant identical to the boy's. The two children stared at each other for a long moment, communicating in some way Grace couldn't understand. Then the girl spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I knew you'd find us, Adam." It was the first time Grace had heard the boy's name. Adam reached out and took the girl's hand, helping her to her feet. She was wearing clothes that had once been expensive but were now worn and dirty, suggesting she'd been hiding here for some time. "I'm Emma," the girl told Grace. "I got out 2 weeks ago. Adam's been helping me through the connection, showing me where to hide, how to stay safe." She touched her implant. "They can't track us when we're underground, too much interference, but we can still find each other." Grace's mind raced with the implications. Not only had these children escaped from an unethical research program, but they'd developed their own underground network, using the very technology meant to control them as a tool for liberation. Emma picked up a backpack from her makeshift bed. Inside were protein bars, bottled water, and most importantly, a laptop computer. "I took it from the facility before I left," she explained. "It has access to their research database, but it's encrypted and I couldn't figure out how to..." Adam was already pulling out his drawings. He spread them on the floor, arranging them in a specific pattern. Grace watched in amazement as complex sequences of numbers and symbols emerged from what had seemed like simple illustrations. "The encryption key," Emma breathed. "You hid it in the drawings, but how did you know?" "He's been planning this," Grace realized. "Everything, the drawings, finding me, leading us here. It wasn't random at all." Adam nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He pointed to Grace, then to his heart, then made a teaching gesture. He'd chosen her specifically, recognizing in her the combination of academic knowledge and street survival skills they needed. Emma was already typing on the laptop, entering the sequences from Adam's drawings. "There are others," she said as she worked. 12 of us altogether. Some are still in the facility, but 4 more are hiding in different places around the city. Once we decrypt this data, we can prove what they were doing." Grace sat back against the wall, watching these remarkable children work. Her years of academic research, her time on the streets, her fall from grace, all of it had led to this moment. She thought of Sarah in her basement office, probably already activating her network of contacts. They would need those allies soon. A soft chime from the laptop drew their attention. Emma's fingers flew across the keyboard, opening file after file. "It's all here," she whispered. "Everything. The real research goals, the military applications they were planning, the side effects they covered up." Adam touched Grace's arm and pointed to his medical alert bracelet again, then to Emma's. Grace looked closer and noticed something new. The circuits in the bands were glowing faintly, pulsing in synchronization. "They're beacons," Emma explained. "Not just for finding each other, but for what comes next. Once we expose the truth, other people like us, gifted children being exploited by similar programs, they'll know they're not alone. They'll know there's a way out." The implications of what these children had accomplished struck Grace with full force. They hadn't just escaped. They'd orchestrated an elaborate plan to expose and dismantle a system that threatened countless others. And they'd chosen her, a disgraced professor turned homeless observer, to help them do it. A distant sound echoed through the tunnels, footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Emma quickly packed the laptop while Adam gathered his drawings. They had what they needed now, but they weren't safe yet. The people behind the research program would be desperate to stop the truth from getting out. Grace felt a familiar surge of protective instinct, mixed with something new, hope perhaps, or the satisfaction of seeing justice finally within reach. She stood and held out her hands to both children. "Ready?" she asked quietly. They nodded, their expressions determined. Whatever came next, they would face it together. An unlikely family forged in hidden places, bearing truth like a torch through dark tunnels. Adam squeezed her hand once, then pulled out a fresh piece of paper. It was time for new drawings, new plans, new paths toward the light. The tunnels beneath Boston's harbor district formed a labyrinth of possibilities, each turn offering both escape and risk. Grace led Adam and Emma through the darkness, guided by the children's uncanny ability to sense their surroundings through their neural connections. The footsteps behind them grew fainter, but Grace knew better than to assume they were safe. Emma clutched the laptop to her chest, while Adam continued drawing as they walked, his pencil moving steadily despite the uneven ground. His newest sketch showed a complex network of lines intersecting at various points. A map, Grace realized, but not of the physical tunnels. It was a representation of the neural network connecting all the gifted children. "There," Emma whispered, pointing to one of the intersections Adam had drawn. "Jenny's signal is getting stronger. She must be nearby." Grace had learned to trust the children's instincts even when they defied conventional logic. They turned down another passage, this one sloping gently upward. The air changed subtly, carrying the scent of coffee and baked goods. They were near the surface, probably close to one of the waterfront cafes. Adam stopped suddenly, his hand flying to his implant. Emma did the same, both children tilting their heads as if listening to a distant frequency. "Jenny's warning us," Emma translated. "There are people watching the exits, but she's found another way." Grace studied Adam's map more closely. The neural network he'd drawn overlapped with the city's infrastructure in fascinating ways: subway lines, utility tunnels, and something else. "The old pneumatic mail system," she breathed. "Of course." In her academic days, Grace had researched Boston's urban development, including the forgotten pneumatic tube network that once carried mail between buildings. Most of the tubes had been sealed off decades ago, but some remained accessible, unknown to all but a few urban explorers and homeless individuals seeking shelter. Adam nodded eagerly, adding more details to his map. He drew a small figure, Jenny in what appeared to be a sub-basement, then traced a route through the pneumatic system that would take them there. The tubes would be too small for adults, but the children... "No," Grace said firmly, understanding their unspoken plan. "We stay together." Emma touched her arm gently. "We'll be safe, Dr. Matthews. The tubes are our size for a reason. Jenny planned this. She's been mapping escape routes since they brought her to the facility. And she has something we need." Grace started at the use of her old title. "How did you—" "We can see fragments of memories through the neural network," Emma explained. "Not everything, but enough. We knew who you were, what you tried to do 5 years ago. That's why Adam chose you. You were already part of this story." The footsteps in the distance grew louder again, accompanied by the crackle of radio communications. They were running out of time. Grace looked at the children. These remarkable, brave children who had orchestrated an resistance using the very technology meant to control them. 10 minutes, she said finally. "If you're not back in 10 minutes, I'm coming after you, pneumatic tubes or not." Adam hugged her quickly, then handed her his latest drawing. Not just a map, but a key to understanding the entire neural network. Emma carefully placed the laptop in her backpack and gave it to Grace for safekeeping. Then both children moved to what looked like an ordinary maintenance panel in the wall. Emma pressed specific spots in a precise sequence, and the panel swung open to reveal the entrance to a pneumatic tube, its metal surface dull with age but still intact. 10 minutes, she promised, squeezing Grace's hand. Grace watched as the children climbed into the tube, their movements practiced and confident. The panel swung shut behind them with a soft click, leaving her alone in the tunnel with Adam's map and the weight of trust on her shoulders. She used the time to study the drawing more carefully. The neural network was far more sophisticated than she'd initially realized. The intersecting lines weren't just connections between the children. They formed patterns that suggested a larger purpose. Some looked like computer circuits, others like musical compositions, and still others like complex mathematical equations. A soft tapping from the walls caught her attention. Morse code, she realized. The children were communicating with her through the ancient pipes, letting her know they were safe. Grace smiled, remembering her own childhood fascination with codes and ciphers. These children had taken that concept to an entirely new level, turning their forced neural connections into a revolutionary communication system. The laptop in the backpack held the evidence they needed, but Adam's drawings were something else, entirely. A blueprint for understanding how gifted minds could work together, support each other, create something greater than the sum of their parts. The research program had tried to study and replicate their abilities through technology, but they'd missed the most important element, the human connection, the natural synthesis of hearts and minds working in harmony. 8 minutes had passed when Grace heard a different sound, a mechanical whirring from another maintenance panel several yards away. The panel opened, and Adam and Emma emerged, accompanied by a girl with bright red hair and eyes that seemed to see through walls. "Dr. Matthews," the new girl said quietly. "I'm Jenny. Thanks for helping my friends." She held out what looked like an old-fashioned pocket watch. "This belongs to you, I think. I found it in the facility's archive room." Grace took the watch with trembling hands. She recognized it immediately. Her father's timepiece, confiscated 5 years ago when she was forced out of her position. But it wasn't just a watch. It was also a data storage device, disguised as a family heirloom. It contained her original research findings, the evidence she'd been gathering before everything fell apart. "They kept it," she whispered. "All this time?" "They kept everything," Jenny confirmed. "They studied your research, Dr. Matthews, used it to refine their program, but they didn't understand what you'd actually discovered, that you can't force minds to connect. The connections have to grow naturally through trust and understanding." Adam touched his implant, then pointed to Grace's heart. Emma nodded. "That's right. The technology just amplifies what's already there. Real connection comes from something deeper." A burst of static from above made them all freeze. Someone was using the maintenance corridors now, getting closer. Jenny quickly pulled out her own map, hand-drawn like Adam's, but focusing on the building systems above them. "They're trying to herd us toward the harbor," she said. "But I know another way. There's an old archive room under the public library, not the main branch, but the small one in the north end. It's been sealed off for years, but you found a way in," Grace finished. Of course she had. These children had turned the city's forgotten spaces into their own private network, more sophisticated than any security system designed to contain them. Jenny smiled, her eyes twinkling with intelligence and mischief. "Better than that. I've been using it as a command center. Computers, backup power, even an old printing press. Everything we need to start sharing the truth." Grace looked at the 3 children. Adam with his revelatory drawings, Emma with her decryption skills, and Jenny with her intimate knowledge of the city's hidden architecture. Together, they had done what she'd failed to do 5 years ago. They'd gathered irrefutable evidence of the research program's true nature. But more than that, they'd created something revolutionary, a network of gifted minds working in perfect harmony, supporting and protecting each other. They were living proof that the most powerful connections couldn't be forced through technology. They had to be built on trust, understanding, and love. The static grew louder, accompanied by the sound of doors being opened systematically. Jenny took Adam's map, studied it for a moment, then added her own notations. "Ready for the next phase?" she asked, her eyes bright with purpose. Grace felt a familiar surge of academic excitement, tempered by years of streetwise caution. These children had chosen her for a reason, bringing her life full circle. It was time to help them share their truth with the world. "Lead the way," she said, and followed them into another hidden passage, carrying the future in a backpack and hope in her heart. The old archive room beneath the North End branch library was a testament to forgotten knowledge. Row upon row of metal shelves held leather-bound volumes and yellowing documents, their spines telling stories of Boston's complex history. But Jenny had transformed this dusty space into something extraordinary. Antique reading tables now held modern laptops, their screens glowing with scrolling data. An old card catalog cabinet had been repurposed to house servers, their cooling, fans humming quietly. In one corner, a massive printing press from the 1900s stood ready to share their truth with the world. "Welcome to the sanctuary," Jenny said proudly, leading them through her underground command center. "I've been setting this up for months, ever since I first started sensing the others through the neural network." Emma immediately connected their laptop to Jenny's system, beginning the process of backing up the encrypted files they'd recovered. Adam moved to a large drafting table where other drawings were spread out, similar to his but created by different hands. Other gifted children had been leaving their messages here, adding to their collective knowledge. Grace examined the printing press with professional interest. "This is perfect," she said. "They'll expect us to try sharing the information digitally. They can block websites, hack servers, control the narrative, but physical evidence distributed through unofficial channels." "Exactly," Jenny grinned. "And look at this." She pulled out a drawer filled with special paper, the kind used for official documents, with watermarks and security features. "Found it in the old city record storage. They can't track or trace it because it's not in any modern database." Adam was already at work, combining his drawings with the others, creating a comprehensive visual document of everything they'd discovered. Emma called them over to her laptop, where the decrypted files were revealing their secrets. "The research program wasn't just about studying gifted children," she explained, pointing to specific documents. "They were trying to create a new kind of educational system, one that would identify and cultivate exceptional abilities, but under strict control." The neural implants were phase 1. Grace leaned in, her academic training helping her analyze the technical documents. They were mapping neural pathways, studying how gifted minds process information differently. "But look at these notes in the margins. Questions about military applications, behavior modification, enhanced learning under stressed conditions." "They wanted to recreate our abilities," Jenny said quietly, "to manufacture what comes naturally to us. But they didn't understand that our gifts aren't just about brain chemistry or neural pathways. They're about connection, creativity, the freedom to explore and grow." Adam touched his implant, then pointed to the other children's drawings. He added a new sketch, a tree with spreading branches, its roots deep and interconnected. The meaning was clear. True growth couldn't be forced or manufactured. It had to be nurtured. The sound of footsteps above made them all pause. Regular library patrons or something else? Jenny moved to a modified security monitor she'd installed. "Normal closing time traffic," she confirmed. "We're safe for now." They worked through the evening, preparing their evidence for distribution. Emma organized the technical data into clear, understandable formats. Jenny used her knowledge of the city's infrastructure to plan distribution routes through the underground networks. Adam's drawings tied everything together, making complex concepts accessible through visual storytelling. Grace found herself falling naturally into her old role as an educator, helping structure the information for maximum impact and understanding. But this time she wasn't working alone against a powerful system. She had allies, brilliant, resourceful children who had turned their challenges into strengths. As they worked, Jenny explained how she'd discovered this space. "I could sense the void in the city's structure," she said, "like a quiet spot in a noisy room. When they brought me to the facility, I started mapping everything: physical spaces, electronic networks, neural connections. The more I mapped, the more I understood how everything was connected. That's why they couldn't control us, Emma added. They thought the implants would let them monitor and direct our abilities. Instead, we learned to use them to support each other, to share knowledge and strength. Adam showed Grace another drawing, this one showing the lighthouse facility from above, with lines radiating outward like a web. Each line connected to a different location in the city where other gifted children had found refuge. The neural network had become their underground railroad, guiding them to safety and bringing them together. "We need to finish tonight," Jenny said, checking her monitors. "They're starting to close in on the other locations. Once we release this information, everyone needs to be ready to move." Grace helped them prepare the printing press, her mind racing with possibilities. "We need to think about what happens after," she said. "Once this becomes public, you'll need protection, legal representation, media support, safe places to stay." "Already planned," Jenny smiled. "Remember Dr. Chen's network of contacts? They're ready. Lawyers, journalists, child advocacy groups, all waiting for our signal. And there's something else." She pulled out an old leather-bound journal from a hidden compartment. "What's this?" Grace asked, opening it carefully. "Your original research notes," Jenny said softly. "The complete set. They didn't get all of it 5 years ago. Some of your students, the ones who believed in you, they saved copies. Been passing them around underground academic circles ever since. Building support, gathering more evidence. Waiting for the right moment." Grace felt tears prick her eyes as she recognized her own handwriting, her early observations about gifted children and the importance of nurturing their abilities naturally. All this time, her work had continued, protected by people who understood its true value. Adam tugged at her sleeve and pointed to the printing press, then to his heart. Time to share their truth with the world. Grace looked at these remarkable children, not test subjects or research projects, but brilliant young minds who had found their own way to connect and flourish. The printing press hummed to life, ready to begin its work. Above them, the library was quiet, its regular patrons gone home for the night. But soon, very soon, this quiet basement would send ripples of truth throughout. The city changing everything. Emma sat at her laptop, fingers poised over the keyboard. Jenny stood by her monitors, watching for any sign of trouble. Adam held his latest drawing, a simple image of hands joined together, forming an unbreakable circle. Grace took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. 5 years ago, she'd lost everything trying to protect children like these. Now they had found her, chosen her, brought her back to her true purpose. Together, they would ensure that no other gifted child would be treated as a research subject, rather than a human being worthy of nurture and respect. "Ready?" she asked, looking at each of them in turn. 3 determined faces smiled back at her. The future was in their hands now, and they would make it bright. The ancient printing press worked through the night, its rhythmic sounds echoing softly in the underground archive room. Page after page emerged, each one telling part of their story through a careful combination of technical documents, personal testimonies, and Adam's revealing artwork. The children had transformed their experiences into something powerful, not just an exposé, but a blueprint for change. Jenny's network of monitors glowed with activity as she coordinated with other gifted children across the city. "Marcus is in position at the newspaper office," she reported. "Sarah's group has contacted the lawyers. Alex has the social media team ready." Each child had their role, their unique gifts contributing to the larger plan. Emma looked up from her laptop, where she'd been analyzing patterns in the facility's research data. "There's something else here," she said, her voice tight with discovery. "Something we missed before. Adam, can you look at this?" Adam moved to her side, studying the screen intently. His hands began to move, creating a new drawing with urgent precision. The image took shape, a complex diagram showing how the neural implants were designed to evolve over time, becoming more integrated with each child's natural abilities. "They weren't just studying us," Emma whispered. "They were trying to create a permanent connection. Once the implants fully bonded with our neural pathways, they couldn't be removed without—" She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Grace felt a chill run through her. "That's why they're so desperate to find you. It's not just about keeping the research secret anymore. They need to complete the integration process before the implants become unstable. Jenny's monitors suddenly flickered with new information. Movement at the facility, she reported. They're activating something. The implant signals are getting stronger. Adam pressed his hand to his head, his face contorted in concentration. Emma and Jenny did the same. All three children linked through their neural network. Grace watched helplessly as they struggled against whatever signal was being broadcast. They're trying to force the integration, Emma managed to say through gritted teeth. Using the emergency protocols and trying to lock us in. But something unexpected was happening. Instead of succumbing to the forced integration, the children's natural network was adapting, evolving. Adam's drawings began to change, showing new patterns of connection forming between the gifted minds. It's working against them, Jenny said, her voice stronger now. Our real connections, the ones we built ourselves, they're stronger than their artificial ones. Quick, Emma, we need to broadcast our own signal through the network. Emma's fingers flew across the keyboard, using the decrypted research data to understand and counter the facility's protocols. Adam drew faster than ever, his artwork becoming a real-time map of the battle between natural and artificial neural pathways. Grace moved to the printing press, ensuring their evidence continued to emerge even as the children fought their invisible battle. Each page represented another piece of truth that couldn't be locked away again, another step toward freedom for all gifted children. The air in the archive room crackled with unseen energy as the neural network expanded and strengthened. Through Jenny's monitors, Grace watched as more signals appeared across the city map, other gifted children joining their resistance, adding their strength to the collective. Look at this, Emma called out, pointing to her screen. The implants. They're not just connecting us to each other. They're learning from us, adapting to our natural patterns instead of trying to control them. We're rewriting their basic programming through our cooperation. Adam's latest drawing confirmed it. The neural network had transformed into something entirely new. No longer a tool for control and study, but a genuine enhancement of the children's natural abilities to connect and create together. Jenny's eyes widened as she processed the incoming data. It's not just us anymore. The network, it's reaching other gifted children, ones without implants. Our natural abilities are stronger than they ever imagined. We don't need their technology to connect. We just needed to understand our own potential. Grace thought back to her original research, the theories that had cost her everything. She had proposed that gifted children naturally formed cognitive networks, supporting and enhancing each other's abilities through organic social connections. The facility had tried to artificialize and control this process, but in doing so, they had only proven her right. The printing press produced its final page just as dawn began to creep through the high basement windows. Stacks of evidence stood ready for distribution, each set telling the complete story of the facility's research program and its unintended consequences. But the real story was still unfolding in the neural network. Through Jenny's monitors, the Kamor watched as gifted children across the city awakened to their natural connections, free from artificial control, but stronger together than ever before. Adam tugged at Grace's sleeve and handed her a new drawing. It showed the lighthouse facility, but transformed, its imposing walls now transparent, its machinery silent, its purpose changed. In the image, children moved freely, their natural gifts blooming like flowers in spring. "Is that what you want it to become?" Grace asked softly. "A real school for gifted children?" Adam nodded, then added to the drawing, a figure standing among the children, teaching and guiding with understanding and respect. The figure looked remarkably like Grace. Emma looked up from her laptop, smiling. "We all want that. A place where gifts are nurtured, not controlled. Where connection means freedom, not constraint. And we want you to help us build it, Dr. Matthews." Before Grace could respond, Jenny's monitors lit up with urgent information. "They're making their move," she announced. "Multiple teams converging on our known locations. But they don't understand. We're not hiding anymore. We're ready to show the world exactly who and what we are." The children gathered around the printed evidence. their faces determined and unafraid. Through their neural network, they could feel other gifted children preparing to stand with them, to share their own stories of extraordinary abilities, and the right to develop them naturally. Grace looked at these remarkable young people, not victims or test subjects, but pioneers of a new understanding of human potential. They had taken the facility's attempt to control them and transformed it into a revolution of consciousness and connection. "What's our next move?" she asked, ready to follow their lead. Adam smiled and began to draw once more, mapping out the path to a future where gifts were celebrated, not controlled, and where connection meant freedom for all. The sunrise painted Boston's skyline in shades of promise as Grace and the children emerged from their underground sanctuary. They moved with purpose, each carrying part of their carefully prepared evidence. The city was waking up, unaware that it was about to witness a transformation in understanding human potential. Jenny's network hummed with activity. Gifted children across the city were in position, ready to share their stories simultaneously through every available channel. Thanks to Emma's technical skills, they had secure connections to sympathetic journalists, educators, and child advocacy groups. "First team is in place at the newspaper office," Jenny reported, checking her tablet. "Marcus and his group are meeting with the editor right now. Sarah's team is briefing the lawyers. Alex has the social media campaign ready to launch." Adam worked as they walked, adding final touches to the visual narrative they'd created. His drawings had evolved into a comprehensive explanation of both the facility's research and the children's natural abilities. Through art, he had made complex concepts accessible to everyone. Emma monitored the neural network through her laptop, watching as more gifted children joined their cause. "The signal is stable," she confirmed. "They can't shut us down anymore. Our natural connections are too strong, too widespread." Grace led them through the morning crowd, heading toward their first destination, the public broadcasting station where Sarah Chen's contacts were waiting. The streets were filled with regular morning commuters, unaware that they were witnessing the beginning of a peaceful revolution. Suddenly, Adam stopped, his hand flying to his implant. The other children did the same, their faces concentrated as they received information through their network. "They're making announcements," Jenny translated for Grace. "The facility, they're trying to get ahead of the story, calling it a misunderstanding, claiming they were helping us." But the children had anticipated this. Emma pulled out her laptop, connecting to their secure network. On screens across the city, personal devices, public displays, social media, feeds, their evidence began to appear. Not as an attack or expose, but as a revelation of truth and possibility. Adam's drawings showed the journey, the facility's attempts to control and replicate gifted abilities, the children's discovery of their natural network, and the transformation of artificial constraints into genuine connection. Each image spoke of potential and promise rather than criticism and accusation. The public broadcasting station appeared ahead, its modern glass facade reflecting the morning light. But before they could reach it, black vehicles appeared at both ends of the street. Men in suits emerged, their stances professional but urgent. "Dr. Matthews," a familiar voice called out. Daniel Whitman approached, his expression complex with regret and determination. "Please, let's handle this quietly. Think about the implications, the panic it could cause." Grace stood protectively in front of the children, but they moved to stand beside her instead. Through their neural network, they could feel the support of other gifted children converging on their location, not to confront, but to witness and share their truth. "The only panic," Grace replied calmly, "would come from continuing to hide what these children can naturally do. Your research proved what I suspected years ago, that extraordinary minds connect and support each other organically. You can't control that process, Daniel. You can only nurture it." Emma's laptop chimed with incoming messages. Across the city, other gifted children were revealing themselves, not as subjects of study, but as pioneers of human potential. Artists, musicians, mathematicians, each demonstrating how their gifts flourished through cooperation rather than control. Jenny's tablet displayed feeds from multiple locations, Marcus presenting evidence to newspaper editors, Sarah's team meeting with educational reform advocates. Alex's social media campaign gaining momentum. The truth was emerging through countless channels, impossible to suppress. Adam tugged at Grace's sleeve and pointed to the broadcasting station. Through the glass walls, they could see activity in the lobby. Journalists gathering, cameras being set up. Their story wasn't just leaking out, it was being welcomed. It's not too late to be part of this, Grace told Whitman. The facility could be transformed into something revolutionary, a real school for gifted children, where natural abilities are understood and supported. Your research could help us understand how to nurture these gifts in all children, not just the extraordinary ones. The men in suits looked uncertain now, witnessing the peaceful assembly of gifted children and their supporters. Through Jenny's network, they could see similar scenes playing out across the city. Not chaos or panic, but enlightenment and understanding. Adam stepped forward and offered Whitman his latest drawing. It showed the facility transformed into a place of learning and growth, where research served understanding rather than control. In the image, children and scientists worked together, each contributing to a greater understanding of human potential. Whitman studied the drawing for a long moment, then looked at the children, really looked at them, perhaps for the first time seeing them as individuals rather than subjects. "You've created something remarkable," he admitted, "something we never anticipated in our research." "That's because it can't be manufactured or controlled," Emma explained. "Real connection, real growth, it has to come from freedom and trust." The sun had fully risen now, its light reflecting off the city's windows like countless new possibilities. Grace looked at these extraordinary children who had chosen her to help share their truth with the world. They had transformed her past failure into future promise, her lost career into a new purpose. "Shall we?" she asked, gesturing toward the broadcasting station's entrance. The children nodded, ready to tell their story, not as victims or experiments, but as pioneers of human potential. Behind them, Whitman spoke quietly into his phone, perhaps already beginning the process of transformation. Together, they walked into the future they had chosen, one where gifts were celebrated, not controlled, and where connection meant freedom for all. The broadcasting station's main studio buzzed with focused energy as technicians prepared for the most extraordinary live broadcast in the station's history. Grace watched as Adam, Emma, and Jenny organized their evidence with practiced precision, their movements synchronized through their neural network. Sarah Chen had arrived moments earlier, bringing with her a team of child development experts and ethical oversight committee members. The station's news director, a woman named Patricia Martinez, listened intently as the children explained their story. "We want to show everyone what's really possible," Emma explained, connecting her laptop to the studio's systems. "Not just what happened at the facility, but what gifted children can do when they're free to develop naturally." Through Jenny's tablet, they could see their story already spreading across multiple platforms. Marcus's team had released their evidence to major newspapers. Sarah's legal group had filed protective orders ensuring the children's safety. Alex's social media campaign was gaining momentum, with hashtags trending globally. Adam worked at a drawing table the studio had provided, creating real-time illustrations as other gifted children across the city demonstrated their abilities. A young musician whose neural patterns allowed her to compose symphonies in her mind. A mathematician who could visualize complex equations as living shapes. A group of artists who could share and blend their creative visions through pure thought. "This is remarkable," Patricia said, watching the feeds. "But won't people be frightened? The idea of children with these abilities—" "That's exactly why we need to show the truth," Grace interjected. "Fear comes from misunderstanding. These children aren't a threat. They're pioneers of human potential. They've shown us that connection and cooperation are more powerful than control and constraint." The studio doors opened to admit Senator Harrison Wells, but this time he came alone, without his usual entourage. His face showed the impact of watching his carefully constructed narrative collapse throughout the morning. "The oversight committees are convening emergency sessions," he announced. "The facility's funding is suspended pending investigation, but..." He paused, looking at the children with newfound respect. I think we all know this is about more than just investigations and oversight now. Jenny's network lit up with new activity. The other research sites, she reported, they're coming forward too. Facilities in Europe, Asia, South America, gifted children everywhere are connecting, sharing their experiences. Emma's fingers flew across her keyboard as she integrated the incoming data. It's not just children with implants anymore. The natural network is growing, adapting. We're proving what Dr. Matthews theorized years ago, that extraordinary, minds naturally find ways to connect and support each other. Adam's latest drawing captured this global awakening. Lines of light connecting minds across continents, barriers of language and culture dissolving in the face of pure thought and creativity. He added details showing how each group of gifted children had found their own ways to resist control and nurture their natural abilities. Grace moved between the various groups, helping coordinate their message. This wasn't about exposing wrongdoing anymore. It was about showing the world a new path forward. The children had transformed their challenge into an opportunity for universal understanding. We're ready to begin, Patricia announced. The studio. Lights brightened. Cameras turned toward their positions. But before they could start, Adam held up his hand, his expression intent as he received information through the neural network. Jenny translated, "The facility director, she's asking to speak with us, not to negotiate or defend, but to understand. She's seen everything we've shared, and she's realizing what they missed in their research." The studio doors opened again, admitting Dr. Eleanor Richardson, the facility's director. Her usual polished appearance was slightly disheveled, suggesting a morning of rapid revelations and difficult decisions. "What you've done," she said, looking at each child in turn, "it's beyond anything we imagined possible. We were so focused on studying and controlling these abilities that we never considered, never understood." "That connection can't be forced," Emma finished for her. "It has to grow naturally, through trust and understanding." Adam offered Dr. Richardson his latest drawing, a vision of how the facility could be transformed into a true center for understanding and nurturing gifted abilities. The image showed laboratories converted into collaborative spaces, monitoring stations transformed into creative centers, and most importantly, children and researchers working together as equals. "We don't want to shut down the research," Jenny explained, her voice gentle but firm. "We want to transform it. Help us understand these abilities so we can help other gifted children develop naturally. Work with us, not on us." Dr. Richardson studied the drawing for a long moment, then looked at Grace. "Your original research. We should have listened. All this time we were trying to artificially create what already existed naturally. These children, they've shown us a better way." The studio lights pulsed once, signaling 1 minute until broadcast. Around the world, through Jenny's network, they could sense other gifted children preparing to share their stories. What had begun as an escape from control had become a revolution in human understanding. Grace looked at these extraordinary young people, Adam with his revelatory art, Emma with her technical brilliance, Jenny with her ability to connect and coordinate. They had taken her theoretical research and transformed it into living proof of human potential. "Ready?" Patricia asked from the control booth. The children nodded, their faces calm and determined. Through their neural network, they could feel the support of gifted minds across the globe, all ready to show the world what was truly possible when extraordinary abilities were nurtured rather than controlled. "Ready," Grace confirmed, standing beside them. The red light on the camera blinked on and they began to tell their story, not just of escape and revelation, but of transformation and hope for the future. As Adam began to draw, his art projected on screens behind them, Grace realized that this was more than just vindication of her past research. It was the beginning of a new understanding of human potential, guided by the very children who had been meant to be merely subjects of study. The future was unfolding before them, bright with possibilities they had only begun to explore. 1 year later, the lighthouse facility stood transformed against the autumn sky. its white walls now adorned with murals created by gifted young artists. Where once there had been security cameras and locked doors, now large windows allowed sunlight to flood, collaborative spaces where children explored and developed their natural abilities. Grace walked through the main entrance, no longer hidden by scarves but dressed professionally as the center's director of research and development. The lobby that had once housed security checkpoints now featured a gallery of Adam's artwork, telling the story of how understanding had triumphed over control. Dr. Matthews, Emma's voice called from the technical lab. Now 16, she headed the center's research into neural networks, helping other gifted children understand and develop their natural connections. The new scanning results are amazing. The natural neural pathways we're mapping, they're more sophisticated than anything the implants were designed to create. In the music room, a young composer worked with Jenny to explore how musical patterns could enhance neural communication. Jenny had transformed her talent for coordination into a new field of study, the architecture of consciousness itself. Her networks now connected gifted children and researchers across the globe, sharing discoveries and supporting natural development. Adam, working in his sunny studio, looked up as Grace entered. His drawings now covered the walls, not just artistic expressions, but sophisticated maps of how gifted minds connected and collaborated. He had become the center's leading visual theorist, helping others understand complex neural patterns through art. "The new students are arriving today," he said, his voice confident now after months of regular use. On his drawing table, a series of pictures showed how the center had evolved and how much further it could still grow. Grace nodded, remembering that day a year ago when they had shared their truth with the world. The broadcast had triggered a global awakening as gifted children everywhere discovered their ability to connect and create together. The facility's transformation into a research and development center was just the beginning. Sarah Chen now headed the medical research division, working to understand how natural neural networks formed and developed. Daniel Whitman had joined their advisory board, his expertise redirected toward supporting rather than controlling extraordinary abilities. Even Senator Wells had become an advocate for ethical research and development of human potential. Implants had been safely removed once Emma and her team discovered how to stabilize the neural pathways naturally. Now they served as reminders in the center's museum, along with other artifacts from the facility's previous incarnation. But the connections the children had formed remained stronger than ever, enhanced by understanding and freedom rather than technology. "Dr. Matthews," Jenny called from the communication center, "we're receiving some interesting data from the European group. Their natural network is evolving in unique ways, adapting to cultural and linguistic patterns we hadn't considered." Grace moved through the center, observing classes and research sessions. In every room, gifted children worked alongside supportive adults, each contributing to a growing understanding of human potential. The fear and control that had driven the original research program had been replaced by curiosity and collaboration. In the library, now a vast physical and digital repository of knowledge about extraordinary abilities, Emma's team worked on documenting new discoveries. "We're finding patterns we never imagined," she explained, showing Grace the latest data. "Every time we think we understand the limits of natural neural connection, these incredible minds show us something new." The afternoon sun streamed through the lighthouse windows as Grace made her way to the observation deck. From here she could see the harbor where their journey had begun, the tunnels where they had hidden, the library where they had gathered evidence, the broadcasting station where they had shared their truth. Adam joined her, carrying his latest drawing. It showed not just their center, but others like it sprouting up across the world. Places where gifted children could safely explore their abilities, where research served understanding rather than control, where connection meant freedom. "We're receiving applications from everywhere," he said, adding details to his drawing. "Not just gifted children, but researchers, educators, anyone who wants to understand and support natural development." The neural network hummed with activity, minds connecting across continents, sharing discoveries and insights, supporting each other's growth. What had begun as a means of escape had evolved into a global community of understanding and possibility. Grace thought back to her original research, to the theories that had cost her everything, and then given her something greater. These extraordinary children had not only proven her right, they had shown her possibilities beyond anything she had imagined. "Dr. Matthews," Emma called from below, "the new students are here." Grace and Adam descended to the entrance where Jenny was already welcoming a group of wide-eyed children and their parents, each child unique, each mind extraordinary in its own way, each ready to explore their natural abilities in an environment of trust and understanding. As she watched Adam begin to explain his artwork to the newcomers, Grace felt the familiar surge of academic excitement mixed with profound gratitude. The facility that had once sought to control these gifts now served as a beacon of hope and possibility. The future stretched before them, bright with promise, as natural connections continued to form and grow. What had begun in fear and control had transformed into a revolution of consciousness and potential, guided by the very children who had shown the world a better way. In the end, it wasn't about extraordinary abilities or neural networks or breakthrough research. It was about understanding that the most powerful connections between minds, between hearts, between possibilities, could only grow in freedom, nurture, and trust. And as the sun set behind the lighthouse, painting the sky in colors of hope and promise, Grace knew that their story would continue to inspire and transform, showing the world what was possible when gifts were celebrated rather than controlled, when connection meant freedom for all. The end. Dear listeners, we hope this story of transformation and human potential has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. This journey of understanding and connection reminds us that the most powerful changes often begin with a single choice to trust and nurture, rather than control and constrain. If you've been moved by Grace, Adam, Emma, and Jenny's story, we invite you to join our community of storytellers and dreamers. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring narratives that explore the depth of human possibility. Leave a like to help others find this story, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Every day we bring you unique stories that challenge our understanding of what's possible. Stay tuned for more tales that illuminate the extraordinary potential within us all. Your engagement helps us continue sharing these meaningful narratives with the world. Thank you for being part of this journey. Until our next story, keep believing in the power of connection, understanding, and the remarkable potential that lies within every heart.